Hi, Braves fans. Well, spring training has begun, believe it or not. We are into spring training games. I was able to watch the Braves' second spring training game today. It wasn't much of a watch. There wasn't a whole lot of action, and the regulars only played a few innings, as is normal early in spring. There wasn't much offense, which hopefully is not something to be too concerned about this early in spring. But, when you tune into a game, you would like to see an Austin Riley home run, or, Matt Olson put one in the gap or something like that. So none of that happened. Um, it was somewhat interesting. Two guys I'm going to talk about early in this episode, Ian Anderson and Grant Holmes, did pitch. So maybe you get a little early idea of what they might bring to the table. But we know both of these guys. And the first spring training start, I don't know how much you can take away from that. But I still get to see eyes on the guys, and that's true of, we're going to get a lot more spring training games to be able to view this year. So that's good. And hey, spring training's here. So that's the best news of late February, right? There's not a lot of sports going on. So it's good to be able to tune in to a baseball game on a lazy Sunday afternoon. So guys, in this episode, I'm going to go through the best possible developments that I'm hoping for this spring. I'm not predicting these. I'm certainly not saying that all of them are going to come true. Honestly, if two or three of them came true, I think the Braves would be well on their way to an excellent season. I mean, I think they're going to be good if maybe just one of these comes true, and the one is particularly important over the others. As I'm going through these, I'm not putting them in a particular order in terms of most likely to come true or the one I would most likely to have happen. I will mention the one that I would like to have happen more than any other, and it's kind of obvious once I get there. But I'm going to give you guys a good 8 things that would be the best possible developments. Some of these maybe would be surprising. Others are just things it honestly would be really good if it happened this spring for the Braves. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into it. My number one is Ian Anderson's stuff ticks up to previous levels, or Grant Holmes does enough to impress and stick into the rotation and be fairly effective. Okay, so basically, does Ian Anderson or Grant Holmes prove it this spring? So if Ian Anderson is able to reemerge as a viable back of the rotation starter. Again, he was coming off Tommy John last year. Basically all year he was in AAA trying to prove it. At the very end of the year, it looked like he might be able to get that postseason start. But, he was not pitching his best at the very end of the year. Now, you can say, he's logging a lot of innings coming off of Tommy John, and it's probably, likely that it was just wear and tear, okay? But he wasn't particularly dominant or anything like that in AAA coming off of Tommy John. So, the Braves have certainly not clamored for another starting pitcher this offseason. I'm sure many of us would have hoped that would happen. The Braves certainly, did kick the tires on Garrett Crochet, but that didn't happen. So it looks like Ian Anderson and Grant Holmes are going to have plenty of opportunity to earn this final. Well, maybe there's 2 spots in the rotation until Spencer Strider gets back. So if Anderson or Grant Holmes falters, or an injury to the rotation occurs, someone else gets injured, then maybe Alex Anthopoulos would be forced to go out on the open market for a remaining cheap starter or trade for someone. I think that's, all of those scenarios are possible. I think the Braves particularly like Grant Holmes and trust in him and his stuff a little bit more. I think Ian Anderson, even though he's been so good in the postseason in his early career, he always walked a really, tightrope in terms of walks and his stuff, and he really is only proven to be a 2-pitch pitcher to this point in his career. He has tried to add a slider, but he hasn't really proved that at the major league level yet. So the best possible scenario for Anderson to cement himself in the rotation with Holmes maybe filling in as the other option until Strider returns. Yeah, I think if Anderson could cement himself in the rotation, that would be the best possible scenario for the Braves organizationally, right? The Braves want to give him every opportunity. He's been a huge contributor in the biggest moments for the Braves, and I think they're trying to do that at least in spring training. And I wouldn't be shocked if even if he doesn't overly impress in spring, if they still give him some starts in April again until Strider returns. At that point, once Strider's back, is it Anderson? If he's proven himself, will Grant Holmes slide back into the bullpen as a really good bullpen arm, or will Holmes be more the guy? And then what do you do with Anderson? Do you put him in the bullpen, or is it time to just cut bait there? So this is probably the most important spring training of Ian Anderson's career. I was able to hear a recent interview with him. He sounds in good spirits. He sounds like, this is the best he's felt. Coming off of Tommy John, usually 2 years is the timetable to really get back to it. Most guys will say that. So let's just remind ourselves. I feel like we're all guilty of when a guy's out of sight, out of mind, we forget how good he was. I think that could even be true with Strider or Acuna. We know how great they are, but it's still just, you haven't seen them in a while, and you almost forget how great they were. And Ian Anderson, for the first 2 years of his career, was really, really good. I mean, he wasn't the perfect pitcher. He had some warts and wrinkles, but he was really clutch in the biggest moments, particularly. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Braves are going to have a pretty long runway with Anderson to see if he can get back to what he was. So in 2020, he came up, the 2020 shortened season, and was just excellent. He blew people away, but it was shortened season. So in 2021, in 24 starts, he backed it up. Anderson had a fastball value of 89 out of 100, 89th percentile, and an off-speed value of 90. And we all know that changeup is really his money pitch, but his fastball was really working well in 2021 at that time. Now his fastball velo was 94.6 miles an hour, his average fastball velocity, and that has come down a little bit, not extremely, but even the next year in 2022, when he wasn't as effective, the fastball clearly wasn't as much. He was in the 85th percentile of ground ball rate in 2021, and so he was able to get out a lot of jams. He had a strikeout percentage that was high enough to overcome some not great walk rates. And then in 2022, he went from a really good pitcher to a pretty average pitcher. His fastball value dipped to the 29th percentile from 89 to 29. What happened there? And all of his underlying metrics dipped pretty significantly. His changeup was still elite, but everything else was kind of down. And if you remember Ian Anderson from 2022, that's basically who he was. An elite changeup, but that was pretty much it. He went from a 3.58 ERA in 2021 to a 5 even ERA in 22 starts in 2022. And I mentioned the walk rate. Walk rate has never been good for Anderson. He's always walked a lot of people, but the walk rate went from 28th percentile in 2021, so bad already, to a terrible 11th percentile in 2022. He was walking the world. His stuff wasn't as good. He wasn't getting out of those jams. So, I think it's possible he was experiencing some elbow issues in 2022, even if he didn't know it. That maybe some of that, lack of command or whatever it was happening because the elbow was starting to go. Or, maybe there's just something that, was not working for him. Maybe it was mechanical. But regardless, he was not the same pitcher in 2022. So the question for me is he going to rebound to 2022 and just not be a very good pitcher anymore? Or can he get all the way back to 2021 or even 2020 when the fastball was tighter and was more effective and he was spotting it a little bit better? His fastball command has never been great. And if you watch that spring training game today, it definitely showed up again. I think he walked 3 batters in an inning and 2/3. So he's never given up a ton of really hard hit stuff, right? It's just a matter to me is Can that fastball be effective enough to get some swings and misses, and for him to still spot it well and have some decent fastball command? Because the changeup is always going to play. The slider, I think, is a nice third pitch just as an option, as a show-me pitch, and occasionally you get somebody looking using that slider. Now, Grant Holmes, how encouraging was his season last year? I think it was very encouraging. I think he threw about 60 innings. But, looking at his Baseball Savant page, you can see why the Braves like Grant Holmes so much. In 2024, 97% percentile in chase rate, 92nd percentile in whiff rate, and 90th percentile in walk rate. Those numbers right there say elite pitcher. Now, he had a 3.58 ERA. That's not necessarily elite, but a 1.19 whip, 70 strikeouts, and again, 68 innings pitched. What he showed was really impressive for sure. He pairs a solid four-seam fastball and curveball with an excellent slider. I don't know if it's near elite slider, but two really good pitchers and one pitch that's even better than really good. And then you throw in really good command, and it makes for a very good pitcher. And I think that's why the Braves like Grant Holmes so much. Also, if he can continue what he showed last year, he's 29 years old. He's incredibly cheap. He's actually pre-arbitration, so he would be controllable for the Braves for so many years to come. So it makes a lot of sense for them to see if he could prove it and become something in the rotation. And even if he can't stick in the rotation, it seems like he's a really good bullpen arm. So to me, I think part of the Braves not being active this offseason in the starting pitching market is about these two guys. I think they want to see finally if Ian Anderson is going to, he was the number 3 pick overall when he was taken, first round guy. He's been a lot for you in the past. They want to see if he's got anything left. And then I think Grant Holmes, they're big believers in him, and it will pay off tremendously if he can turn into a really good, even 4th or 5th starter. All right, so one of those guys, if just one of those guys can come through this spring, it would be excellent. If 2 of them can come through, man, that would be even better. All right, so my second thing, second development I'm looking for is either Smith-Shawver or Hurston Waldrop to show that they are ready to take the next step and potentially be called up into that starting rotation. Both pitchers were met with a lot of hype. And Smith-Shawver, let's be honest, he was likely forced into duty far too early. I don't think the Braves are expecting either to suddenly be ready for the big leagues. Smith-Shawver basically had a lost season last year with injury. Waldrop was really just, I don't know if he took a step back, but he really struggled with some things last year. They tried to get him to adopt a slider, which would seem to work off of his elite split finger pitch a lot better. It didn't work well. He's going back to his curveball, a little more of a mix that maybe Justin Verlander or somebody like that has. So I'm looking forward to seeing Waldrop. I think it's pretty easy to be lower on Waldrop or less excited about him, but I think either of these guys could come into spring and impress. They certainly have the stuff to do that. I think Smith-Shawver is the more likely candidate, in terms of spring training, and could he step into the rotation earlier? With some thinking, again, Waldrop, maybe he finds his way into a bullpen role, at least early on in his career. The bullpen is pretty wide open. I'm going to talk about that later on in this episode. Could Waldrop actually make the club in the bullpen? And then, it doesn't mean that he's done as a starter forever. But the Braves, that kind of elite arm in the bullpen wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. All right, the number 3 thing, this is definitely an under-the-radar thing, but the number 3 thing that, a development I'm looking for this spring training, or I'm hoping for, is Nick Allen. Nick Allen wins the backup role in terms of the infield, and maybe even pushes Orlando Arcia a little bit. So Allen has performed pretty well in the minors for Oakland over his whole career. He just never, when he's been brought up to the big leagues, he's never really performed at that level. Now, maybe that just makes him one of those quad A guys that can never quite figure it out. He does have a great glove, at least as good as Arcia, maybe a little bit better. And he can legitimately play all 4 infield positions. So I think this gives him some potential to be the Whit Merrifield or whatever name you want to throw out there for the Braves this year. So in terms of his minor league numbers, he's a career 285 hitter in the minor leagues with a 359 on base percentage. Pretty good. Not a ton of power, but a solid hitter in the minor leagues, and it just has not translated to the big leagues. I doubt he is going to win the shortstop job outright over Arcia this spring. But if his bat proves to be a little better than what he's shown in the past at the big league level, it might be interesting to see what happens, especially if Arcia is still terrible with the bat this year. Maybe 1 or 2 months of Arcia being really bad, and Nick Allen has provided a spark here and there. He might get some playing time, and if Arcia were to go down for injury or anything like that, Nick Allen is right there. I do think he's a step up from the Zach Shorts of the world or Luke Williams or those kinds of guys that we've seen recently that are quite honestly just fillers. I think Nick Allen is a better player than that. Again, I'm not saying he's going to be an all-star or anything, but considering the Braves, Arcia is your 9-hole hitter, and he's a solid defender. Could Nick Allen be that? Yes, I think he could be just that. So it's just going to be interesting to see if he shows anything in camp this spring. All right, next development I'm hoping to see. Drake Baldwin further proves that he is major league ready. And look, we need him to be major league ready if Murphy were to go down with any kind of injury. It's like break glass in case of emergency. You want Drake Baldwin there in AAA ready to go. So I'm not sure there's any way Baldwin makes the club out of spring training, barring an injury to Murphy. There just doesn't seem to be a natural spot for him. You're not going to have him, play 30% of games, bringing up your top prospect. That doesn't make any sense. But success this spring would be another check mark in his development. And people are outside of the Braves are really loving Drake Baldwin. He's moved up majorly in a lot of these top prospect lists. Does that mean anything concrete? No, but people are taking note of Drake Baldwin, his success in the minor leagues over the last couple years, the fact that he is at least a solid defensive catching option. And he really comes across, I also was able to hear a recent interview with him, just really comes across as a smart guy, well-spoken. That doesn't mean that you're going to be successful with the bat in your hands or that sort of thing, but it's just another thing that makes me excited that Baldwin could be a pretty big-time player for the Braves. And there's a reason the Braves didn't trade him this offseason. I was a fan of them not trading Baldwin because I've seen some of these signs that I really like this guy. I've always liked his swing from the first time I saw it. So Baldwin being big league ready gives the Braves enviable depth at the catching position this season. And as I've discussed previously in previous episodes, 2026 to me is the game plan. It sets up well for him to step into a bigger role, to be the backup catcher and the primary DH. You move on from Ozuna. He's been great, but he's going to be expensive moving forward, and he's getting older. I think it makes perfect sense, at least to have as an option, even if it's not like the absolute thing that will happen. It's sure nice to have that guy. And then if Murphy really tanks it and can't recover from last year, which was a disastrous season, having Baldwin in your back pocket is excellent. And I mentioned this last thing. If Murphy does go down with injury, look, I like Chadwick Tromp, but I don't like him as your everyday. I like him as your backup. And so if Murphy were to go down, being able to go to one of the best catching prospects in baseball, pluck him out of AAA and install him as your everyday catcher moving forward, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So I really like the Braves catching situation. I'm a huge fan of Drake Baldwin. I hope the Braves hang on to him, and I'm looking forward to, even if we don't see him in 2025 at the big league level, I'm looking forward to seeing some at-bats from him in spring, and hopefully he plays well and impresses the Braves and just continues to improve his stock there. All right, next development I'm hoping to see. this spring. No, and this is the biggest one, by the way. No major injuries occur, and Ronald and Spencer Strider remain on schedule. Remain on schedule, please, to come back as early as possible. Last reports I heard was late April, and before that I'd heard early May or mid-May. So late April makes me even happier. And that was from Justin Toscano recently on another podcast. You guys might have heard that one too. So late April would be just wonderful as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, no other major injuries too. Let's put 2024 and all of those injuries totally behind us. This is obviously the most important factor for any team, but especially the Braves with two of your best players coming back from injury. If Strider and Ronald can come back on schedule and be healthy, it's the biggest factor for this whole season. A healthy Acuna is a total game changer for the team, as he is the most talented position player in baseball. And he needs to remind everyone of that. He made MLB's, I think he was number 16 on MLB's best players. And, they all make the caveats that, well, if he comes back healthy, he's going to move up the list. But we all know he's way better than 16. He probably should be number 2 right behind Shohei Ohtani, who just kind of is in his own little category. But he needs to remind everyone how great he is. He doesn't need to remind himself. He's going to bring all of that, all of that focus and just confidence with him. We know that's true. Spencer Strider, he isn't far behind. Ronald on talent and impact for the Braves. And with Fried's exit, I think he just needs to step into that role. Fried, I think, is underappreciated in terms of how consistent he was, how much of a bulldog he was on the mound. I think Strider has to fill in that role. And I've loved Strider. I think he's absolutely one of the team leaders. I think it really hurt the Braves. And I mentioned this when they went down. I think you took out not only two of the most talented players on the team, but kind of the heart and soul. I think Strider, in terms of the clubhouse, is really, really important. He's smart. He's analytical. He's really honest with the media and what he thinks. And I think he needs to be in that clubhouse. So I'm really looking forward to him and Acuna coming back. And by the way, how impressive has it been to see Ronald Acuna answering all of his questions in English? Way to go on him. If I had to learn a second language in my 20s, I guarantee you it wouldn't be pretty. I don't think I would be able to do it. So I just am very impressed by that. And it's really cool to be able to hear directly from him and not through an interpreter. All right, my next development I'm hoping to see in spring training, that Braves stars lock in their swings entering the season. I didn't see it today, but hey, it's the second game of spring training. Matt Olson, Austin Riley, Sean Murphy, these are guys that, the season started and just seemed like they weren't ready. And whether it's their fault or the pitching, the hitting coach's fault or whoever else, everybody just seemed off other than Marcell Ozuna when the season started last year. So swing mechanics were off for everybody. I hope that Tim Hires, he's new, he's coming in to the fold. And with that experience from last year, hopefully a newfound focus on the swings and approaches from these hitters can be locked in for the season. A closer version offensively of the 2023 season for Matt Olson and Austin Riley and Sean Murphy would have huge impacts to this team's offensive output. So my next development that I would like to see this spring, one bullpen unknown breaks through to be a major contributor. And we've got plenty to choose from because the Braves were just going nuts, signing minor league contracts to all these relievers. Some you've maybe heard of, a lot you've never heard of. So look, I think an underplayed thing this offseason has been losing both setup men from last year, right? Joe Jimenez goes down with his knee injury and knee surgery, likely out for the year. I mean, maybe he comes back late, but even if he comes back late, is he going to be the same guy? You're not going to immediately just throw him into the 8th inning. And of course, the A big loss that I think has really gotten buried this offseason is losing AJ Minter. And losing AJ Minter hurts enough, but losing him to the Mets, I'm gonna want to throw up when I see AJ Minter in a Mets uniform. It's a gut punch for sure. So losing both of those guys, how do you bridge the gap well to Raisel Iglesias? And surprisingly, at least to this point, the Braves haven't replaced either of these guys. That doesn't mean they won't. And in fact, I really expect Anthopoulos to make a move, at least for a righty, to replace Jimenez. I think with Bummer and particularly Dylan Lee, I think Dylan Lee could step into that late game role, and he's been really good over the last couple of years with the Braves. But there's a lot of question marks with the bullpen. So at least one guy stepping up and being a big contributor, even if it's not an eighth inning guy, even if they have to go out and find that guy on the free agent market or with a trade during spring training, maybe that happens. But hopefully someone can step up. They do have a lot of guys internally with varying degrees of talent. And, if just one of these guys can step up, it would be big. Angel Perdomo is one guy on my radar. He's a big lefty with electric stuff coming off Tommy John surgery. The Braves got him from Pittsburgh just because Pittsburgh is so cheap. They didn't want to pay enough to send him through Tommy John. So the Braves basically paid through that, and now they have a good look at him. Buck Farmer's another guy that they signed on a minor league deal. He's a righty coming off of an excellent 2024. He might have, overperformed some of his numbers, but still he's had 3 straight solid seasons. And he's a veteran reliever. So I could definitely see him making the club as a mid type of guy, not a back end guy. So of course, even with this, they need another high leverage reliever. And I would be honestly shocked if they don't go out and get one this spring. Alex Anthopoulos always kind of overdoes it in the bullpen, and this year he's underdid it. So I don't know what that's about, but hopefully something happens there. All right, my last one, guys. My last development I would like to see. I'm definitely not predicting this one, but it would be a pleasant surprise, and that would be if Jared Kelenic locks in and has a great April. We know that Ronald should be back by late April, maybe if he's pushed back a little bit, mid-May. So however long it takes, Jared Kelenic's going to be out there probably in right field for most of the at-bats, and we know he's talented. He didn't live up to that hype last year. He really has never lived up to it in his career thus far, but he's got another opportunity to show his stuff. And I'm sure mentally he's trying to live in the moment and not think about when he's going to see the bench. But he also doesn't know. I mean, we don't know if there's going to be another injury in the outfield. Jared Kelenic would be the next man up. And so for him to have a great spring and be ready and play well in the early portion of the season could really be a big lift for the Braves that you're not necessarily counting on, but would be pretty big. And yeah, if there's an injury, I mean, the thing I like about the Pro Far edition is the Braves have improved depth in the outfield. Kelenic is a much bigger talent than anyone they could turn to last year, even though it's largely been yet to be unlocked. There were some reports that Braves hitting coaches traveled to Wisconsin to work with Kelenic one-on-one over the offseason. That's good. Him playing well in April will not only help the Braves obviously win games in the early stages of the year, but he could be an interesting trade piece at the deadline. If he plays well in April and, then just kind of is a solid contributor here and there for the rest of the season, it could be an interesting major league ready piece that you have to deal that some teams would want, and he's still under team control for whoever would get him for a number of years. So there's some value there, and it could be a pretty important thing for the Braves if they get to that point. And I do expect the Braves to be pretty active at the trade deadline. I think I've kept thinking through their inactivity in spring training and in the off season, and to me, it sets up a more aggressive trade deadline, the team you start spring training with, and even the team you start the season with, is never the team you enter August with or October with. And I think Anthopoulos is very aware of that. And there's some guys that might be on his radar who aren't available now that could be available later in the year. And Jared Kelenic could be a big piece in acquiring those guys. So hopefully he can do it for his own career and kind of set himself up for the next step. And hopefully it can help the Braves in the process. All right, guys. So none of these things are things that I'm particularly expecting, except for Ronald and Strider to be back soon. But they're all things that would be awesome if they did happen. Hopefully we can, start the season with everybody firing on all cylinders offensively, and it can be a much more enjoyable season. 2024 was not the most fun season to watch, and I'm hoping for a lot better things to come for 2025. So spring is here. Hope springs eternal, as they say in baseball, and hope you guys enjoy this spring training and that some of these things at least come true for the Braves. All right, thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you soon.